again, fabulous people. It is Jen here, and today, as you will have seen in the title description, I am doing a VR to Becca Talks and Tarot on my tarot growth. And this has been a really interesting thing to reflect on, and I guess put a little bit more thought into than what I have done in the past. I've already recorded this video once and iMovie kind of ate it on me. So it's taken me days to come back and have the time to re-record this. But okay, I've got the questions here that Becca's kind of posed. So it's about things like, how has your tarot journey evolved? What was your first deck you ever bought and the most recent deck? Has your art style changed? Has the way you do spreads changed? And has the systems that you use changed? Well, my tarot journey, I guess its evolution has been one of those on again, off again, and while we can't ever, I guess, guarantee anything, I don't think this time it's going anywhere in a hurry. So if you followed me since the beginning, you'll know that I started reading when I was a teenager. I don't know how that stopped. I don't know why. I have a feeling it may have just been because I was married young, I had my first child young, and life got busy after that. So while we're on that topic, I'll tell you my very first tarot deck. And I'm not necessarily doing these questions in order, I'm just going to go all over the place until they're kind of answered. So The Beginner's Guide to Tarot by Juliet Sharman Burke, illustrated by Giovanni Caselli, was actually my very first tarot deck. This isn't the specific one. I do actually have my first tarot deck, but I had bought these little like cheat kind of stickers that you put on the back, and looking back on them now, I don't actually think they were even RWS based ones. So I started the process of trimming and trying to get those stickers off to reback it, and I kind of put it away because it was driving me crazy. But I did manage to get another copy of this deck, and it's a secondhand, even though it's still readily available. I didn't want to just go out and buy it, so when I found it as a secondhand deck, I was more than happy to purchase it, and it's in beautiful condition. The backs are extremely plain and boring, but I still stand true to my word, and I've talked about this before, that this is actually a great beginner tarot deck. It is very RWS based, but one of the reasons I think it's a fantastic tarot deck is because in the minors it actually says what it is, which is the Three of Swords. If you go to most of the RWS decks, yeah, you can count that there's 3 swords, and it's not that difficult. But when my son went through a very brief period of kind of looking at tarot decks, I was trying to find one in my collection that was the easiest. And of course I first went through all my RWS based decks, but I started to notice, well, they don't all say on the basic cards, just trying to get to some more, you know, they don't say 2 of Cups, they don't say 3 of Cups, 4 of Cups, etc, etc. So I still stand by the fact that this is a fabulous beginner's deck. It is the one I started with. I actually think the imagery in this deck is more easy to take in than the traditional RWS. Yeah. So then it all got put aside. And like I said, I don't know an exact reason. I remember I was reading as a teenager, because I remember I was reading for people who worked with me at my very first job at KFC that I started when I was 14 and 9 months old, which is the exact time you are legally allowed to start working here. And all I can put it down to is that I had my kids young and life got busy. So then it was, hold up, just need to turn my heater down because it's getting hot. And you might wonder why I'm always whinging about being cold and having a heater on, yet I'm not. I could just put a jacket on, right? I hate being squished up. That's why I hate winter. I hate 50,000 layers of clothes on. It drives me crazy. Anyway, total side note. So then, much later in life, time went by. I've also talked about this before, where I had everything I wanted and things just still didn't feel okay, and I felt lost. And again, I've said it before on my channel when I've talked about this. I kind of posed the question to other colleagues saying, does anybody feel like when you studied psychology you kind of lost the whole spiritual side of yourself? Because studying psychology, it's drummed into you that it's all about research and statistics. Like, literally, the majority of what you learn at university is frickin' statistics in psychology. And, or at least in the first, 4 years of the study. And I took myself away one weekend. It was over a few nights. I don't know the exact of how many. And I went to my ex-in-law's house at Bribie Island. They have a holiday home there. And not far from there, like a 5-minute drive, is a beautiful shop that has everything. It's got all sorts of homewares, like decorative type stuff, ornamental stuff of all different varieties. It's got clothes, it's got bags, it's got incredible lamps, it's got jewelry, it's got crystals, and it has a couple of tarot decks. And for some reason I saw them, and I saw the Crystal Visions tarot and went, why not? I'm gonna try tarot again. And I can't remember if I did even Google the images. I may have, but I can't remember. I certainly didn't know at this point that the thousands of decks existed out there in the world. So I didn't really know what I was getting into bringing this home. Up until that point, this deck here was like my only experience really with having tarot decks in my hands. And when I got this back to the holiday home, it just spoke to me. It was what I needed. It was pretty. It was gentle. It was, the coloring was me. It had a magic to it. It had like a fairy tale world element to it in my eyes, and I just loved it. And the whole time I was there, I spent reading the book. And as you can see, the little white book is very well worn on this one. And then my hubby came to visit he must have had the next day off, so he came to stay for a night. And I remember reading for him, and I was as nervous as crap. And even though I'd been reading over the book, and it's funny how certain memories come back to you from back when I was a teenager reading, and as soon as I started to look at the images again and read up their meanings, bits and pieces came back. And I was shit scared. I used the book the whole time and I did his reading. And I came back after that holiday and I didn't do too much with my tarot deck after that. I came back and it was like I'd forgotten everything I went away for, and I was just back to reality. I was back to running my private practice and all of that. And time went on, they got put aside, and then I was getting more and more discontent with life. And I think so many of us have turned to or found the tarot at those times in life when we get discontented. And I ended up having my own reading with, she uses oracle decks, but is also more of a psychic medium person. And my reading was basically about my future, my career, things like that. Now, bear in mind at this stage, I'd achieved what I wanted to achieve to that point. I had become a registered psychologist. I had had my first private practice. I had moved and set up a big private practice with multiple rooms. I was working with psychologist mentors who had grown big private practices, very successful, very financially successful private practices. I was paying out tens of thousands of dollars in mentoring. I had created a beautiful practice, and that's not to blow my own horn, but it was. It was peaceful, it was beautiful, it was completely not clinical at all. It was a gorgeous place to be in, and it was like I had it all, but it wasn't me. I didn't want to be a boss to other psychologists. I didn't want the shit of interviewing subcontractors, taking them on, them realizing, despite my being honest with them, that you are not going to get the money in private practice that you think you are, especially those who have come from government jobs where the money is secure and it's steady and it's all taken care of. It's not like that. It's being in private practice is not where the money is, despite what people think, because they forget about everything else that comes with being a business owner in private practice. And I hated that, and it wasn't me. And I was making this real shitty decision, and went to this reader / psychic medium. And I've been to ones before, even when I was quite young. And all of them have made comments to me about, you have the ability to do this. And she herself was just like, do you have a deck of cards? And I was like, yeah, I do, but I don't know where they are. Only remembering like this very first deck that I had. Totally forgot I'd purchased these not that long prior. And so she said, go out, get a deck of cards. So I went out and I didn't bring them over, but I basically got that shitty original Rider-Waite-Smith box where it's all blurry, and I freaking hated it. And all of a sudden I remembered I'd bought these while I was away, so I went to them. I actually ended up going along to, because this person also ran like groups where she taught reading and all of this, and it gave you an opportunity to practice with others. And I went along and I took these cards with me, and I'd worked a lot with them even leading up to that. Done a lot of reading, learning, trying to memorize as you kind of do. And when I got there, she was like, oh, you have tarot cards? I'm like, yeah. Because, and then there was this comment of, I don't believe in tarot cards. And even though she kind of made out like, well, it's okay, if you resonate with them, use them. But everybody else there had oracle cards except me. And I remember being so excited because I was following along. We did certain readings, like just for ourselves, but I come home and I'd loved it, and I was really excited telling my hubby, like, it all just came to me, and there was intuition involved, and I didn't get stuck on any of the cards I was reading, and it was great, and I loved it. But then the other side of it was I felt like I didn't belong there, because I didn't want to just learn reading oracle cards. Tarot, I already knew was where my passion and my love was. So I never went back to that, and kind of just kept studying on my own. And the way I started was with this book. Well, the way I restarted after, you know, my younger teenage years. And that's why it is so used. This is where I began. This is where I started. And I guess from that point, like so many of us, I had no freaking idea. I never even used YouTube for anything before. I didn't really have a reason to. And I think it might have been when I was very first away, the first time I got these, when I was at Bribey Island, I was just Googling, I don't know whether I was Googling card meanings or I was Googling different tarot spreads or about tarot. I don't know what it was. And I found a couple of channels, like I'm pretty sure Kellyanne Maddox's was one of them. And I listened to a few videos, but again, I still didn't realize what Tarot Tube was. So then when I came back to my tarot cards and I wanted to dive deeper, and I started to get online more, and that's when I discovered more and more of there's this whole world of YouTube out there and this whole world of decks out there, and it kind of just, it grew from there. So one of the ways I guess my journey has evolved is it started out very much just trying to memorize and learn meanings from this book, right? It's where I started, and I still think A Little White Book is a great starting place because they can give you enough info without overwhelming you. But as you start to watch more people on YouTube and you start to hear people talk about both different books that give you information and what people think are good tarot books, as well as people talking about not being dependent on tarot meanings and all of that kind of stuff. And so in that respect, that was a definite change in my tarot journey, because it wasn't all about the perfection of memorizing what this little book said and what I'd learned, and then other things I'd read and tried to memorize the extra bits in those. The more and more I watched, the more and more it became about, yeah, I can trust my intuition. Because I've always trusted my intuition in every other part of my life, and it's never been wrong. Even doing therapy with my psychology clients, there would be times where I'd just get this hit of, this is what we need to be doing right now, or I think this is going on with this person, and either they don't want to say it or they're not even aware of it, and would bring it up and it would be bang on. So I was using intuition in other parts of my life. As a mum, I think we develop like a mum intuition very quickly as well. for all different reasons around our kids, when we just know something's not right, whether it's emotionally or physically or that kind of thing. And so that's definitely one way my tarot growth has just evolved and changed. And I'm still an advocate for learning meanings. I'm still glad I learnt the basics and the meanings and all of that, but I'm also glad that over time I got more confident to kind of branch out and trust that intuitive aspect as well. So let me have a look at the questions. I'm going to skip to, has the way you do spreads changed? Yes, because when I can't remember what I did back as a teenager, so I can't talk to that. I can only assume that I probably did, and I haven't looked at this, even when I rebought this, I never actually looked at the book to see if there are spreads in here. I'm assuming there are because it's a beginner's guide. God, this is a great learner's book, even all the info. Sample readings, major arcana. So yeah, they must. Yeah, there's a couple of sample reading spreads in the back. So honestly, back when I was a teenager, there would have been no contemplation of like Google. Don't even know if Google actually existed back then. Not sure. Can't remember. So I definitely wouldn't have been looking up online. So I'm guessing I would have done spreads, based on this book. But then when I came back to it, the first spread I did with my hubby, and again, I don't have a shit memory, so it would have either been the only one spread in this book, which is the Celtic cross, and I have a feeling it was. If not, it could have been one of the few things I did Google and look up while I was there, whether I found that through YouTube or just the internet, I don't know. But I have a feeling it was the Celtic cross that I did for him. And I don't know that I ever actually used the Celtic cross spread after that point in time. It didn't resonate with me, maybe because I was nervous reading for him. So it just turned me off and I was reading the book to get the messages. But again, it's part of being around other people and listening to how they do things. There are times where if I have something specific that I really want to delve deep into, rarely will I look for an online spread. I will usually create my own spread to answer the actual specific questions I want. The majority of the time, I will just throw cards down. Even doing readings for other people, I'll throw cards down and in whatever way feels right for me at the time. So sometimes that could be a 9-card spread. Sometimes that could be me starting with 5 cards and then just developing from there, whatever feels right at the time. And I guess the only other actual spreads that I do and the way it's changed is if I'm seeing someone on YouTube do a spread, because there are lots of people I follow who will take spreads and always credit where they got them from. And I'm useless with Instagram. But if they've done a spread that I think, wow, that looks really cool, I'll go and do that spread. So it's evolved in that way, and now it's really down to whatever I intuitively feel is right at the time. So yes, my spreads versus non-spreads, all that kind of thing has definitely changed. Has the system you've used changed? Not as an overall. So still the majority of my decks are RWS based. Again, another thing I didn't even know existed until I found TarotTube, that there were these different systems of of tarot and all of that. The majority of my knowledge is around RWS. I'm someone who loves learning. So yes, I went out, and one of the first Thoth decks I got was the little mini Thoth. And I got the mini one because I didn't want to spend huge amounts of money on the Thoth if I didn't like it. Funnily enough, I've actually ended up with quite a few Thoth decks. Now, the images in Thoth are right up my alley. They're weird, they're eccentric. It's totally my art style. I think what has stopped me is that I bought a book. Don't know where it is to tell you what book I actually bought. And I did start learning the Thoth. But then, you know, you get other decks in and time gets away from you and you just can't learn everything at once. And I have the mini size, I have a normal size, I have the big size. I have other versions like the Vision Quest and the Sun and Moon Tarot and the Urban Tarot that are Thoth based. The Tarot of the Spirit, which is also Thoth based. And these images are just me. They're totally me images. But it's just not having that mental capacity to learn everything at once. And I'm someone who, if I'm going to learn something, I'm going to deep dive into it. So even though I started, I then got distracted. One of the reasons I got distracted was because at the same time, I decided I'd delve into Marseille as well. Because, you know, that's what you do, right? You just try and do everything at once. And the first Marseille deck I got was the Marseille Cat Tarot. I got this twofold because I love cats. This is only part of the deck, by the way. I really adore cats, and I bet, because this is still in order, I bet it's got no pips in here. Oh yeah. So this also gives little indications throughout. Let's get to some pips. So little extra images with what the cats are actually doing that relate back to the RWS. And I thought, okay, well that's cool. I love cats and it might be a good starting place for me. And that was great, except my brain then goes, no Jen, if you want to do this and learn this, you're going to do it the right way. So within a couple of days of having gotten that, I went out and I got the CBD Tarot de Marseille. The reason I picked this one is because I had heard how great the book that comes with this is, and I decided I wanted a more authentic Marseille deck. Again, I started studying it. I started learning it with the, gosh, what's his name? The Yoav Bendoff book. But I was trying to study this. I was trying to study Thoth. And I also had the general life stuff to deal with, right? So, again, life just got busy. I put the study aside but, you know, kept it. I was still happy to have it, happy to have the book, because I knew I'd come back to it. But, once again, if you followed me for any time now, it was this, the Triomphe della Luna Paradoxical Rose Edition, that made me completely fall in love with Marseille, and then because of that made me start taking my study of Marseille a lot more seriously. And this deck for me is what just opened me up to the system of Marseille, and I am so in love with it. Now, I still have a lot to learn with Marseille. I am confident enough to use this to read for myself, but I'm not going to pull it out and read for anybody else at this stage because I'm not that confident yet. But this deck got me just hooked on Marseille and loving it. And yes, I would love some of the other amazing Marseille decks, particularly the ones that are based on really old decks. I would love them, but I'm so in love and happy with this that I'm not at a point where I need to spend the money buying those other ones. One day, most likely, but for now, this is my everything Marseille wise. So in that sense, the system has evolved, but I wouldn't say it's changed. Now, getting into has your art style changed, and this will cover actually a few of the questions all in one. When I first started out, like many people, went crazy and bought lots of decks, but I don't regret it because so many of them are different, you know, and even though I might have a lot of animal-based decks, they're all different. I'm just trying to look around at what I've got. Even though I've got a lot of kind of happy, airy-fairy kind of decks, they're all different. So even as I started watching and wanting this and wanting that and wanting this, I don't regret any of them because they all have something different to offer me. And all it means now is that, okay, I now know I don't need every deck because I've already got this great collection that all have different themes and offer something different to me. So I'm much more picky. I love weird, I love odd, but that's just always been me, even outside of tarot. And so again, not so much that it's changed, it's just I buy different decks because I like having different styles of decks. And coming into what's the last deck I actually purchased, so as in bought for myself and have received, still waiting for Ireland to post to Australia to get my Bubba decks that I bought, but yeah, that's another topic. But the last one I actually purchased for myself and received was the Falakos Tarot by Carmen Sorrenti. And so not only does this answer that question of what last deck I bought, it answers a whole lot of questions. This has a very unique art style. Images are totally not based on RWS or any system for that matter. And now we all know that I'm in love with my Marielle, right? And again, totally not based on RWS or really any system. It kind of incorporates bits and pieces of a lot, but totally unique. The difference is in my love for this deck, I studied the shit out of this deck, okay? So even though I take my own intuition with it, I studied the book of this deck inside out to increase my knowledge, to increase my passion, and because I freaking just loved working with it. The difference is, with my Falakos Tarot, a lot of people rave about the beauty of the guidebook. I don't. It's sweet and it's nice, but it does nothing for me as far as teaching anything. But even if it was a guidebook like the Marielle, by the time I got this, it was like, I don't have the headspace to learn a whole nother style of tarot deck. And I really questioned as to how I was going to read this deck. Because as much as I've changed and will bring a lot of intuition into my readings and have often gone off from the normal meaning and just read what I see in the cards that has nothing to do with the traditional meaning, I didn't know how I would go with a full deck where that was the case. So not only does this have 3 completely different styles of art throughout the deck, and I won't go into it all here because I'm already over 30 minutes. Surprise, surprise, Jen, right? You'd think this being the second time round I would have shortened it, but no. It's just as long as the first time I recorded this. Not only does it have 3 different styles of art, yes, it fits into that category of me wanting more and more weird decks, and decks that are out there, and decks that stray away from the stock standard Rider-Waite imagery. But this deck has changed the way I read on a whole nother level, because I've never read by traditional meaning, even looking up the book to get the notes on this deck. It has been purely intuitive, and it really gave me confidence in myself that I had the ability to do this. You know, I watch all of Tracy at Two Rocks Tarot's videos, and she has always talked about pretty much not reading decks based on the meaning. She, in any system that she's picked up, has gone on and on and on about how she reads purely intuitively, and did so with the Marielle. And I've always loved that, and I learned a lot from that. But I never ever thought that I would get to a point where I would read a deck without any meaning, be it traditional RWS meaning, or Thoth or Marseille, or the meaning provided in the book. And this deck has just taken that for me to a whole nother level, and it has completely changed my reading style. It has opened my mind. It has increased my confidence in my intuition, and I have not had one issue, despite the initial fears, with reading this deck. So that, talking about this being my last deck, kind of, I think, incorporates all the questions for me. How my tarot journey has grown, how my art style has changed and evolved, and just gets weirder and weirder, and I love it even more away from the tradition. Still love my traditionals, but it's changed in that way. It's changed, I guess, the system, because this deck is really not based on a system. So yeah, and I think the only other thing I wanted to really add that has changed and been a huge, not changed, but been a massive part of my tarot growth is my tarot space. And that might seem like a really weird thing to bring up in this, and it's not part of the questions or anything, but for me, my tarot space and the way it has grown with me is very significant, very significant. It started out as one bookshelf with a table in front. That evolved to the whole side of a room where, and you will have seen the evolution of this in videos I've done in the past, in a big downstairs open area, multiple bookshelves, decks all surrounded by them, you know, big open space, big table, all the rest, to coming where I am now, into a very small bedroom. And each time that my space has changed and evolved, it's brought something different to me. And my setup now might be smaller than any area I had prior, even when I first started out and only had minimal decks. But where I am now, the space is as much an important part of my tarot growth, because this room I sit in serves so many purposes in regards to my journey, and my journey does largely involve tarot. And that's why once upon a time you'd actually see me sitting there in front of all my decks. But now the center of my room is like my mat and my cushion, and in front of me is all my kind of Buddhist meditation area. To my side is still all the big shelves filled with tarot decks. Behind me, you know, this little shelving I made is the decks I pull out because I want to spend more time with them, as well as some of the favorites I can't bring myself to put away. You know, behind here is just things I love. St. Christopher is very important to me, but it's crystals I love, it's candles, crystals that have been gifted to me by other people. I keep one of my cards out, I keep another card over here. I talked about these two beautiful, and my rosemary, which I found out since if you watched the last video, and my Palo Santo, which were gifts. Over this side is my Mukai, and why? Just because I bloody love it and it brings me joy. It's my little Mukai area. Over this side is my indoor fairy garden. I don't know if you call it a garden because it's indoors. This whole room has been set up with all the things and just here beside me is now a tiny little table that I do my tarot readings on. And everything in here, while it's much more cramped than ever before, every part has a purpose. And that has been a massive part of my growth, of learning what serves me, of learning what brings me peace and comfort, of learning what I need in my space to perform and carry out all the different things that are important to me, like having the fun time of the fairy garden, having all my beautiful decks, having the space I sit and look at when I meditate, having all the other things I adore here in this area, having my small table here with the beautiful things and crystals and candles I have on it. And that has been a massive part of my tarot growth, because when I walk into this room now, it is everything, and it brings me peace, and it brings me comfort, and it brings me just an instant sense of calm through my mind, that when I sit down with a deck in my hand, whether it's to do just a basic quick reading, whether it's to play around and have fun with my cards, or whether it's to do a serious tarot reading, it just puts me in that place. So I had to add in that my space has also been a massive part of my tarot growth. I am now over 40 minutes. The second video is longer than the first, even though I talked about the exact same things. I just give up on trying to say I'm going to make things shorter. I don't. If you don't like how long my videos are, I'm sorry, but don't watch them, because I've just come to this conclusion. It's me. I'm never going to make them short. All right. Thank you if you've stuck with me for this time. Thank you, Becca, for creating this great tag, because it's given me a lot to think about and a lot to be grateful for. All right. Take care all. Love to everyone. Mwah. Bye.